Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, USFL edition today. I understand the NFL draft is happening tonight, and I will be back here with Dwain McFarland as soon as that is done to break that down. But you know what? USFL happens this weekend. It's live football. Going to continue doing 2 of these per week to complement our ever-evolving fantasy coverage. Don't worry, everyone. It is just me here. Solo pod edition. Dwain McFarland was kind enough to bless us with his utilization report goodness, though. So it was fun having Dwain here for a week. But about 2 weeks after the draft is over, we're going to start doing team preview pods. Going to be having 7 fantasy NFL focused podcast per week. And you know what? I appreciate Dwain and don't want him to turn into a black hole of not having a life other than talking about football and stuff. So should probably make sure that we stick to NFL version stuff with that. But anyway, we're here to talk USFL and let's do it. Everyone, great day to be great. Hope this Thursday has been a fun time for all of you. So basically, goals today. Quickly want to go through my top 3 takeaways after 2 weeks of action. Go through the power rankings, injury analysis, best bets, and we get out of here. So with all that said, let's get after it, everyone. You can find this USFL Week 3 Power Rankings, DFS, and Gambling Preview on PFF.com. It is going to be behind a paywall right now. I've had a lot of people ask, what is the easiest way to get access to USFL premium stats? And the problem is that we only have those right now really behind even the paywall. It's in our PFF Ultimate product, so it's not something you can readily access, but I am giving you guys everything you would ever need from that right here in this article. So if you want access to these USFL stats, all you got to do is spend, 50% of the normal price because we have code DRAFT50 to get a PFF Elite annual subscription. So all locked article content, draft guide, mock draft simulator. Again, DRAFT50 for 50% off a PFF Elite annual sub that will get you all the USFL info you need to know, in addition to all the other cool stuff that PFF always provides. So with all that said, everyone, let's go ahead and get going on the top 3 takeaways through the first 3 weeks of action. First 2 weeks of action. But anyway, this is a mostly run heavy league. Like in high school and college, you don't need to be the most pass-heavy offense. It's only in the NFL when things are as efficient as they are throwing the football that it becomes, a war crime basically to be this run-heavy offense. But what we've seen in the USFL just kind of shows the difference between some of these teams at the top and bottom. Number 1, by far, in situation-neutral pass play rate, the Philadelphia Stars at 73.1%. Birmingham Stallions at 59.3%, are the only other team above 55%. So the Maulers, Gamblers, Bandits, Breakers, and even the Panthers are all between 50 and 55%. New Jersey Generals sitting in dead last at just 45% situation neutral pass play rate. I think week 1 is skewing that number a little bit. Remember, the Generals ran the ball on 24 straight plays in that second half of the game. But it's also just, 2 weeks of data and, hold that with a little bit of hesitation, I guess, here with the Generals. But either way, guys, the Philadelphia Stars, not only 73.1% pass play rate, but they're spreading it out with 4 or 5 wide receivers on the field all at once. Gotta love what Bart Andrews has been doing in Philly. Actually Birmingham, but you know what? We're calling them these names, so might as well stick with it. Also want to point out that, guys, Jonathan Adams has been balling, truly. I showed you guys the highlights in the review pod earlier this week, but the things he was able to do last week were, a big reason why I think a lot of people actually had him ranked as a draftable wide receiver before last year. I mean, you look at him going down the sideline, being, over reckless on his Odell Beckham, making this one-handed snag, but that wasn't the only play. Back in the end zone, managing to levitate for an extra second, getting those feet down for the 2-point conversion. and finish things off later in the game with another contested catch down the sideline. So Jonathan Adams, man, we've been looking at this league, trying to go ahead and find that number one wide receiver that is just better than everyone else on the field. Right now is looking a lot like Jonathan Adams. We had the PJ Walker, Cam Phillips, XFL, DFS goodness going on. Might just be Jonathan Adams and Kyle Sloter here in the USFL. So shout out to Jonathan Adams, truly just been balling all over the place this year. And finally, wanted to quickly note that protecting the quarterback, not exactly a given in this league. Pressure versus the pass rush, a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. Is the offensive line back? They've been facing really good defenses, or have they been making the defenses look good because they're bad? With that said, we've had 3 teams clearly do a much better job of protecting their quarterback than the others. The Pittsburgh Maulers, New Orleans Breakers, and Birmingham Stallions, all between a 19 and 21% pressure rate. Everyone else is up above 28% or more. And honestly, the Philadelphia Stars at 28%, pretty much in the middle. The bottom 4 teams in pressure rate allowed, the Bandits at 35%, the Generals at 39%, the Panthers at 39%, and the Houston Gamblers at 47%. Just really tough to get behind. And I mean, luckily, when we look at some of these teams, the Gamblers, the Panthers, and Generals, we're not really looking at those passing games much anyway, because we have 2 quarterback situations going on in New Jersey and Houston. I think Michigan could devolve into that after last week. Shea Patterson just not doing much with his full-time opportunity. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Paxton Lynch getting more involved in future weeks. Hell, even the Tampa Bay Bandits, we all thought Jordan Tiamou could be the number 1 QB in the USFL. He was being used in the committee with something named Brady White last week. So this is just a good thing to keep in mind here, with the Maulers. Yeah, maybe Love is going to be a quarterback that we can start to get behind, because even though the offense seemingly is a little bit, more old school than we prefer, but Kirby Wilson having that run-first mentality. But when you look at it through 2 weeks, Pittsburgh actually does rank 3rd in situation-neutral pass play rate. They've done a good job protecting the quarterback, and we've seen guys like Bailey Gaither actually go out there and make some big plays for him. So passing games, I would generally be sticking to Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Birmingham, and Philly. Not only because of this note about, having the improved offensive line to actually keep these quarterbacks upright, but conveniently, these are also teams where we can expect only one quarterback to be under center. So again, not a guarantee with the Maulers. I don't think Kyle Luletta's necessarily completely out of the picture. And we also have to look at Birmingham and Alex Magoo potentially coming back. So particularly the New Orleans Breakers and Philadelphia Stars, we got a good offense, we got a good offensive line, and we got a quarterback that not only is being protected, but has actually proven the ability to go out there, play every snap, and put up some good numbers. With that said, let's get to the Week 3 power rankings. At the top, the New Orleans Breakers, 2-0 and a plus 37 point differential. Obviously a bit inflated from the beatdown over the Bandits in Week 2, but plus 37, guys. I mean, only the Stallions at plus 9 and the Stars at plus 1 are even in the green. So the fact the Breakers have that large of a lead, I mean, we're talking 28 points over the number 2 team in point differential. Truly been impressive. Looking at the defense, PFF's highest graded overall group. I mean, Kyle Sloter is dealing with a handful of injuries. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But the New Orleans Breakers have earned the number 1 spot through 2 weeks of action. Number 2, Birmingham Stallions, also undefeated. My number 8 team before the season, in large part because I did not believe in Alex Magoo. Well, he got hurt, and now Jamar Smith is in there doing the damn thing. The other big part with Birmingham, we talked about this after week 1, this pass rush is for real. They have pressured opposing quarterbacks on 41 of 69 dropbacks, 59% pressure rate for this defense. No other unit has a pressure rate even higher than 33%. So maybe it's a little bit of a small sample size. I really don't think Birmingham is going to pressure opposing QBs on 6 out of every 10 dropbacks for the rest of the season necessarily, but still, they've been doing so good right now. And if that pass rush is continuing to be even, 50% as good as what they've been this year, this could be a situation where I think they can win any given Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, whenever the USFL is playing these games. Number 3, the Philadelphia Stars at 1-1. I love the pass-happy offense. We have seen Brian Scott, league-high 8 turnover-worthy plays so far. He's gotten a little bit lucky in terms of defense, dropping picks and stuff. We do have the PFF's lowest grade overall defense, but with the Stars, back-to-back weeks of their offense looking at worst average, and we'll take that in this league at this point because our number 4 team, the Tampa Bay Bandits, at 1-1. Like, guys, they've scored 3 points in their last 6 quarters of football. It was a great first half in week 1. But at this point, Todd Haley offense isn't exactly looking like a world-beating group. Jordan Tiamou is again rotating with Brady White. It's not good. So we'll see. I think they're going to bounce back. I still believe Tampa Bay is a top 4 team in this league. But if this offense keeps sputtering, and then we can't even trust Tiamou to be out there a lot, maybe not. Maybe the Tampa Bay Bandits are the biggest frauds of the 2022 USFL action. Number 5, New Jersey Generals, also 1-1. We've seen DeAndre Johnson and Luis Perez flash to various extents, throughout the year. Defense has allowed the 3rd fewest points through 2 weeks of action. I wouldn't hate people for, putting them actually ahead of the Bandits. They do have the same record, but ultimately, I was more impressed by the Generals' Week 1 loss to the Birmingham Stallions than their Week 2 win over the Panthers. So, I mean, that game last Friday night, which is pretty brutal, and I think a situation where, Generals got the W on the win-loss column, but I think anyone that kind of was watching that was the real loser. So I can only imagine if you had to play in that. Team number 6, Houston Gamblers, 1-1. Clayton Thorson continues to look really brutal, guys. 4.7 yards per attempt. He's completing just 47.8% of his passes. So PFF's third lowest graded offense, third lowest graded defense. Houston Gamblers, I think, are the worst team that has actually managed to win a football game so far. And finally, number 7, Pittsburgh Maulers, and number 8, Michigan Panthers, both teams 0-2. Shout out Josh Love with Pittsburgh. He actually has been PFF's second highest graded passer through 2 weeks. And I mean, that game against the Stars last week, 30-23, they were leading in the second half. So they know what it's like to lead in the second half of a USFL game. The Michigan Panthers cannot say the same. So I was surprised to see Shea Patterson take such a steep step back in Week 2. I mean, he was legitimately good in the second half of Week 1. It just wasn't meant to be, though. I mean, you look at this offense and, established the runs. Cody Main and myself were kind of mocking, what Michigan was doing coming into the year. Their offensive coordinator having, these DVDs out there you can buy on his tight end heavy spread offense. It just hasn't come to fruition. So if the quarterback play is going to be mediocre and the offense and, the defense isn't going to really help matters, it's just going to be a rough season for the Jeff Fisher-led Michigan Panthers. So have the PFF team grades, right here for all the squads, as you all can see. New Orleans Breakers, number 1 overall graded offense, and they have the number 1 overall graded defense as well. So New Orleans Breakers really in a league of their own. Shout out to the Pittsburgh Maulers. I mean, I have them ranked a little bit down here. I think, they've gotten maybe a little bit overachieved in the passing game so far, but hey, so far they've been doing their thing. We'll see if they keep it up. The Michigan Panthers have at least had a good defense to complement one of the league's worst offenses in the league. But at the same time, when you look at the specifics of it, they're living much more on a good run defense as opposed to having the sort of pass rush that can cause problems. That is where the Stallions really peak. I mean, 85.3 team pass rush grade. Nobody else is even at 74. So just some good notes here. I like to kind of see where the league is at overall before we get into the nitty gritty, which is going to be our Draftkings Preview. So guys, looking at this, the one big thing to keep in mind, we got to keep an eye on the injuries and roster moves. They always do this shit at 2 a.m. or whatever they're releasing this. I went through this morning, had this article up on PFF.com, by 7 a.m., whenever the hell the editors put it up in the morning, and I had to make a good 10 adjustments to it just based on all these injury news and releases that go on. So I made a USFL Twitter list for everyone if you just want to go follow it. All it has is the 8 USFL teams, and then I think my guy Cody and maybe one other person or so. But if you look through these teams once, twice a week, at least do it before you set lineups, you're going to save yourself. Because we've had guys like Jordan Lastly, JoJo Ward, like top air yard, top target guys from one week to the next that I think a rational, smart USFL, fiend like myself, or like I like to think I am, guys that we might be behind, but you just, once they're cut from the freaking team, obviously they're not capable of putting up any sort of numbers. So got to be on the football field to catch any passes or score fantasy points. Shocking take there, everyone. So with that in mind, I'm going to update the injuries as they stand right now. 1:26 p.m. Eastern on this lovely Thursday. I would recommend, though, again, going through this list before Saturday happens and you guys set those lineups, because usually they do a good job of updating us on everything, giving us questionable, giving us guys who are demoted to practice squad. It's just up to you to actually do that once over before we get started. So with all that said, injury situations to keep an eye on at quarterback. Stallions quarterback Alex Magoo is practicing in a limited session this week. So he was the week 1 starter. Like Jamar Smith did not come in until Magoo got hurt. I think Smith has played well enough to win the job. I think he should continue to be out there. It's not a given though. So if Alex Magoo is not going to be ruled out for this one, I would not be getting behind Jamar Smith because it seems like a situation that could feature more than one quarterback throughout the game. Houston Gamblers quarterback Kenji Baher has been limited throughout this week with a hand injury. If he is ruled out, we could actually project Clayton Thorson for a full game's worth of snaps. I talked about Thorson earlier. I mean, sub 50% completion rate, sub 5 yards per attempt rate going on there. I don't love Clayton Thorson by any stretch of the imagination, but with that said, if we can't actually project him for 100% of the snaps, all of a sudden he becomes a reasonable tournament play. New Orleans Breakers quarterback Kyle Sloter. He was full to start the week, downgraded to limited on Wednesday from what I could tell. What's real interesting is that he's only listed on the injury report with a hand and a shoulder injury. I think it might actually be a sprained left wrist. It's not his throwing hand, which is good. But he's also dealing with a popped groin, as they said on the podcast. So apparently popping your groin doesn't even land on the injury report here. But Kyle Sloter is banged the hell up, people. And he's facing that Stallions pass rush that we talked about with that 60% pressure rate. So Kyle Sloter, man, if he is this much less than 100%, I do worry about what that's going to be like, come this weekend with a bunch of pass rushers in his face. And finally, big situation to keep an eye on here. Brian Scott with a knee injury did not practice to start the week. In case Kukas, the backup, was limited with an Achilles. So Kukas would be under center if Scott is not able to play. Would like to think that they're not going to have, the league's by far highest pass play rate if forced to go their backup quarterback. Just something to keep an eye on because Brian Scott, what he's been able to do, overall QB1 finish last week. And yeah, so Brian Scott is my favorite quarterback play of the week. If he's going to be out there, let's keep an eye on that knee injury though. And again, with Kukas and the Achilles as well. Dwain McFarland's handy dandy quarterback utilization here. This is all year-to-date numbers. You can check out the article for some more specifics, week 1, week 2, and all that. But yeah, we only really have 2 quarterbacks so far that have played 100% of their offensive snaps. They are Kyle Sloter and Brian Scott. So those injuries are even more imperative to keep an eye on because of these splits. Jordan Tiamou last week splitting things off with Brady White a little bit. White was so bad that I would like to think they're going to go back to Tiamou full time. So I'd say he's someone we can reasonably play still. I'm not that worried about White stealing snaps. These other situations, though, are pretty tough. I mean, the gamblers, we'll see if Kenji Bahar is going to be out there or not because of that hand injury. But if he is going to be active, I would expect him to continue to steal away a couple possessions from Clayton Thorson. Luis Perez and DeAndre Johnson with the Generals continue to be the league's most pronounced 2 quarterback rotation. Remains tough to get behind either of them. Josh Love did play every snap for the Maulers last week after Kyle Luletta was splitting things up more in week 1. We'll see how that goes. But Love has played well enough in this offense to maybe have some exposure to. With the Panthers, they said when the game started that Jason Garrett, I think, was doing the broadcast, and he mentioned that Paxton Lynch was supposed to play. He did not play throughout the whole game. Even though Shea Patterson was rather terrible, I would expect Paxton to probably get back in there next week. So probably not going to be riding that Shea Patterson comeback train like we were last week. And then finally with the Stallions, keep an eye on Alex Magoo because if he's back, I would expect him to find some way to get on the field, whether that's starting over Jamar Smith completely or at least getting in there at the end. So really, Brian Scott, Kyle Sloter, Jordan Tiamou, and Clayton Thorson, and Josh Love. Those are the 5 quarterbacks I would be most confident in playing the majority of their offensive snaps. 100% snap rates I'd predict would be Brian Scott, Kyle Sloter, and maybe Jordan Tiamou. That's it. The other guys, all two quarterback situations. Favorite play of the week is Brian Scott. Got to keep an eye on that injury, but it's not just Scott. It's Scott having this pass-heavy offense and the fact that the Breakers, we talked about, it's not the Breakers, excuse me, the Stars talked about this last week. The injuries they have at wide receiver and the lack of promotions they've made from the practice squad, lack of roster moves, made it so that we have Maurice Alexander, Jordan Sewell, and DeAndre Overton running a route on every single one of Scott's dropbacks. 100% route participation rate. So when we have Scott and then we know exactly who's going to be on the field to go catch his passes, those are sort of stacks that we should be loving in Fantasyland. I will be fading Kyle Sloter, though, coming off the big game just because of these injuries and then this matchup against the Birmingham Stallions pass rush. So the Stallions, despite that good pass rush, have still, I believe, given up the most points in the USFL. So I'm not saying the Breakers can't put up some numbers, but man, guys, hand, shoulder, popped groin, too much going on there to really be all in on Sloter. So maybe he proves me wrong, but I will be fading Sloter in a tough matchup and with so many injuries to be dealing with. Running back, 3 main injury situations to keep an eye on. First of all, with the Stars, Matt Colburn with his knee injury is back practicing in full, so expecting him to be out there. And Darnell Holland with his hamstring was at least limited. So Holland actually hurt his hamstring on a kick return, and last week that led to Paul Terry, soaking up most of the backfield's work. Keep an eye, though, that on Colburn because he was out in week 2. So if Holland and Colburn are both active, Paul Terry, who was one of the most used running backs in week 2, feasibly won't even be in the rotation. I think based on Colburn and Holland, seemingly being at less than 100% if they're able to suit up, though, could turn into a 3-back committee. So we can live with 2 running back backfields. None of these teams are giving us an every down workhorse anyway. Once we get into the 3-back committees, as we saw last week with the Stallions, though, no, it wasn't the Stallions. It was, sorry, everyone. It was the Panthers. That's right. Once we get into the 3 running back committees, that's when things get a little more difficult. Speaking of the Stallions, though, they could be back into a 3-back committee themselves here because Jordan Chun has been limited this week with a hamstring injury. He was limited last week as well and didn't play, but just realized we have Tony Brooks-James, CJ Marable right now just split in the Birmingham backfield. If Chun is active, that would now become a 3-back committee, lowering the ceilings and floors for everyone involved. And finally, New Orleans Breakers backup running back, but the overall PPR RB1 in all of USFL football, TJ Logan, did not practice to start the week with a foot injury. So Jordan Ellis, he's already leads the league in rush attempts. He's the only running back in the league that leads their team in snaps and rush attempts, but is number 2 in their backfield and, fantasy points. He's someone that they haven't ignored on passing downs, but they've been way more willing to target TJ Logan. So if you take Logan out of this offense, all of a sudden Jordan Ellis probably deserves to be projected for the highest overall touch share. So with that said, a quick look at the season-long utilization. So again, the backfields that could be featuring not 1, not 2, but 3 running backs. The Stars, if everyone for them is healthy. The Stallions, if they do end up getting Jordan Chun back into action. And the Panthers are also going to be having 3 guys out there. The Bandits are featuring 2 running backs. BJ Emmons soaking up most of the work, period, but Juwan Washington, their scat back, he actually had his snaps go up last week because of all the negative game script, but BJ Emmons continues to be a weekly top 5 option at the position. With the Breakers, I mentioned Jordan Ellis. When I wrote up my article yesterday, Jordan Ellis was my favorite play of the week. Still is, but mainly because, again, just expecting some solid regression for him versus Logan in terms of, Logan, the overall PPR RB1 in the USFL this season, but when he's getting fewer snaps, fewer rush attempts, and the routes, 48% versus 39%, not dominant or anything. I just think that Ellis's time will be coming, possibly as early as this week. With the Gamblers, Mark Thompson working ahead of Dalen Dawkins on snaps, rush attempts, and routes alike. That's rare to see, in the USFL. It looks like Emmons, Mark Thompson, and Garrett Groshek are the only running backs in the USFL, along with CJ Marable. So CJ Marable, Garrett Groshek, and Mark Thompson are the only running backs to lead their backfield in snaps, rush attempts, and routes alike. So stuff to keep an eye on there. Also look at Trey Williams for the Generals, someone that deserved to be ranked, I think as high as he was going to last week, but on the year, PPR RB4 would be higher, but Darius Victor is getting in there and stealing away a lot of those rush attempts and 67% of the snaps inside the 5-yard line. Rush attempts inside the 5-yard line for Darius Victor. So, dude is freaking yoked. Reminds me of, oh my gosh, what was his name? Doug Martin, the muscle hamster. Shout out throwback name there. That's who Darius Victor kind of reminds me of, the way he is juiced to the gills seemingly in that backfield. So basically, long story short, everyone, I think the true running backs we can be targeting as the leaders in their backfield this week: BJ Emmons from the Bandits, Jordan Ellis for the Breakers, Mark Thompson for the Gamblers. Trey Williams and Darius Victor, I think, are close enough in the league's most run-heavy offense to both be viable plays. Garrett Groshek for the Maulers. And other than that, I am probably fading the rest of these backfields because they are consisting of 3 running backs. So the Panthers, Stallions, and Stars, keep an eye on these injuries, but if we do end up getting Chun back and then Colburn and Holland play for the Stars, they're just going to be too muddled to really be focusing on. So again, mentioned Jordan Ellis and why I like him as my favorite play of the week. Just 5,400 on DraftKings. They aren't updating these prices hardly at all, based on what's actually happened the week before. So cannot stress enough how much you do not need to use the entire salary scale to be making your lineups. Jordan Ellis at 5,400 you're not going to see him unless you're scrolling down well past the top 5, top 10. But I do really think, especially with that TJ Logan injury, he's deserving of arguable top, preview placement at the position. And I want to be fading those 3-headed committees from the Stars, Panthers, and Stallions again. So running back room, I'm continuing to probably be using wide receivers a little bit more in my flex than running backs to begin with, but we are starting to have some clarity there, again, with Emmons, Ellis, Thompson, Williams and Victor and Garrett Groshek emerging as more than viable fantasy options. Close things out for our Draftkings preview with the wide receiver and tight end rooms. Quite a few injury situations to be aware of here. With the stars, Christian Rowland, week 1 star, playing a lot in the slot, getting peppered with targets. He has been practicing in full this week, expecting him to be back. Devin Gray with the ankle injury, a little bit less sure. Maurice Alexander popped up on the report with an ankle injury, and practice squatter Brennan Eagles still not practicing at all. So last week, without Rowland and without Devin Gray, Maurice Alexander, DeAndre Overton, and Jordan Sewell ran a route on 100% of the offense's dropbacks. We also had Bug Howard getting a big boost there with 82%. Bug Howard, essentially the USFL's Kyle Pitts. He's a tight end that plays wide receiver, and we call him a tight end regardless of that. So over 80% of his routes have been in the slot or outside this year. Bug Howard would be a de facto top 4 wide receiver in this offense if Rowland and Gray continue to miss time. If Rowland does come back like we're expecting, though, I do think that hurts Bug Howard more than most because of his, mostly being used in the slot. So tentatively expecting Alexander, Overton, Sewell, and Christian Rowland, if he's back, to be the top 4 wide receivers and pass game options for the Stars ahead of week 3. With the Generals, Jamon Moore with a hamstring injury, still not practicing. Randy Satterfield popped up on the injury report as well with a hamstring injury. So Darius Shepard was getting featured, in this offense without Jamon Moore last week. He was a little banged up in week 1 himself, but no other wide receiver than Satterfield or Darius Shepard ran a route in even 40% of the dropbacks last week. So with Satterfield banged up, I think Darius Shepard's the only wide receiver we should really be paying too much attention to inside this run-first New Jersey Generals offense. With the Michigan Panthers, Jeff Badette, Joe Walker, both practicing in full, looking like they will be back out there for Michigan. Last week, Lance Lenoir, Devin Ross were out there for almost 100% of the offensive routes. Lenoir was out there getting a league-high 164 air yards. I do like going back to Lance Lenoir, a week after he busted for a lot of people. Even when Badette and Joe Walker were healthy, Lance Lenoir was playing, and working as the de facto number 1 anyway. So if anything, I think Jeff Badette and Joe Walker coming back into the picture probably just kind of clears out the thought of rostering anyone else from Michigan because it's going to be a little too muddled, a little too full with all those tight ends they also like to use in the offense. Pittsburgh Maulers wide receiver Jeffrey Thomas still banged up with that groin injury last week. Without Thomas, we saw Trey Walker and Brandon Mack basically cancel each other out, working as the 3rd and 4th wide receivers. 2 guys to focus on in this Maulers offense are Bailey Gaither, who we have seen ball out this really entire season, and Delvin Hardaway, who's one of my favorite plays this week because he's a full-time player. Getting targets, he just hasn't converted them quite as well as Bailey Gaither to this point. With the New Orleans Breakers, Chad Williams, thigh injury, and he has now been released. Also need to keep an eye on Sean Poindexter, who is limited with a thigh and neck injury, should be considered questionable. So last week, Poindexter got back into the rotation, 78% routes. Johnny Dixon was at 75%. Aforementioned awesome superstar Jonathan Adams at 85%. Also saw ex-NFLer, the Taiwan Taylor, out there running 63% of the routes. So if Poindexter is going to end up missing time, would probably be the biggest bump for Taiwan Taylor there. At least getting some targets and stuff. But again, it's Jonathan Adams, I think, would just be, he's the number 1 in New Orleans, assuming Kyle Sloter is going to be healthy enough to actually throw the football. And finally, Bandits wide receiver Derek Dillon with a shoulder injury. Like, if you look at the Bandits, they're using 6 freaking wide receivers more weeks than not. So I don't think that Dillon's going to make too big of an impact one way or another. But yeah, if you want to target that passing game, we'll take, every reduced option we can get. With Dwain's lovely wide receiver and tight end utilization report, you can see right away the guys that do actually have these route rates worth getting into, because again, there's only a few teams that actually have condensed pecking orders in the passing game that we can really get to. So looking at offenses that have had multiple players with 80% plus routes, and teams that we can actually expect to know who's going to be out there beyond just a little bit of confidence. With the Stars, mentioned this, but Jordan Sewell, DeAndre Overton, and if healthy, Maurice Alexander should be the guys playing most of the snaps. Last week, they were out there for 100% of their offensive routes. Just realized, though, if Christian Rowland's going to get back into the picture, it probably would just decrease things for Bug Howard more than anyone. So Sewell, Overton, Alexander, Christian Rowland are the top guys to be looking at for the Stars. Also have a nice, just clarified pecking order going on with the Stallions. Victor Bolden, Marlon Williams, and Osiris Mitchell all between 96% and 100% routes this season, excuse me. So yeah, we have some uncertainty in terms of, is Alex Magoo going to come back and what's that going to mean with Jamar Smith? But these wide receivers in Birmingham, I think, are fantastic to put in the lineups of all shapes and sizes to help fill things out. Panthers, again, I like Lance Lenoir. Other than that, mostly staying away. With the Maulers, Bailey Gaither, PPR wide receiver 2 on the season. Delvin Hardaway is the wide receiver 15. But still, their routes are identical. I mean, their targets, Bailey Gaither, 23% target share. Hardaway just at 20%. Air yards, 30% versus 27%. I mean, if we did like the player A versus player B, Gaither and Hardaway, you could barely tell the difference of them, but Gaither's been the one scoring all the fantasy points. I would like to think at some point it's going to swing back to Hardaway's direction. With the New Jersey Generals, really only Randy Satterfield has been out there on a per play, per route basis, high end streak throughout the entire year. Just tough situation with him, as banged up as he is at the moment. So keep an eye on Jamar Moore's status as well. But yeah, you can't quite see it in this chart because I did a minimum route participation of 50% on the season. But for the Generals, Darius Shepard, who came on strong in week 2, would be the preferred number 1 option if you want to invest in that offense. With the Gamblers, Isaiah Zuber really standing out as their number 1, 97% route rate. No one else above even 70% on the season. And 40% of the offense's air yards have gone to Isaiah Zuber. Only other guys in the USFL with an air yard share of at least 40% are Osiris Mitchell for the Stallions and Lance Lenoir with the Panthers. New Orleans Breakers, another room that we can feel pretty good about who's actually going to be out there. Jonathan Adams and Johnny Dixon, 80% plus route rates on the year, and then should have Sean Poindexter, if he's healthy, out there for a good chunk. If not, remember, Taiwan Taylor should be out there. And then with the Bandits, just so much of a mess there. They're using 5-6 wide receivers a week, and I was getting behind Jordan Lastly because he had 31% of the air yards. He was leading the way in terms of routes, targets per route, all the good numbers for Lastly. He was, at the top of, shout out Josh Hermsmeyer, the air yard model where you're looking at receiving yards minus air yards and seeing, who has the most, who's been just not making the most out of their opportunities. But Jordan Lastly got released, so he's no longer a member of the Bandits. That would put presumably John Franklin at the top of the list. They even used him in some Wildcat stuff last week. But ultimately in this Bandits offense, so many mouths to feed in this passing game. Even O'Grady, their tight end, he was playing all the snaps, all the routes in week 1. He got put basically in a tight end committee in week 2. So if anything, I might go with Tiamou and then back to O'Grady and hope that he'll get, some enhanced just route participation after. I'm not sure why he was rotating at all last week. So if I was going to invest in the Bandits passing game, would probably be O'Grady and now John Franklin with Jordan Lastly out of the picture. Straight to the favorite plays. Already mentioned these guys, but yeah, Lance Lenoir and Delvin Hardaway. There were only, there were three total wide receivers that have had more than 100 air yards and realized receiving yards and have run a route on over 50% of the offense's dropbacks. So the third one was Jordan Lastly, but again, he got cut, so he's out of the picture. That leaves us with Lance Lenoir and Delvin Hardaway as full-time receivers in their offense. They've gotten a ton of air yards, ton of opportunities, just haven't managed to cash into it yet. So Lance Lenoir, I love going back to the well with him after he burned people, and I get it. I don't love having Shea Patterson, Paxton Lynch throwing the ball either, but Lenoir was getting healthy out there, and I just think that he's going to have depressed ownership this time around after burning so many people last week. And then with Delvin Hardaway, mentioned just the closeness that he's had with number 1 receiver Bailey Gaither in terms of target rate, air yard share, and all that, where we're looking at the PPR wide receiver 15 versus the wide receiver 2. So love Delvin Hardaway in a bounce back spot this week. As for my fades, I want to pivot, same kind of sentiment. I want to use the recency bias in everyone's mind from week 2 and pivot to other guys in the offense that are playing just as much. We just didn't see them put up the numbers. So if you look at, the breakers in week 2, we had Jonathan Adams work as the overall wide receiver 5, Jonathan Dixon as the wide receiver 4. Keep an eye on the health, but Sean Poindexter with a 78% route rate and Taiwan Taylor 63% could be out there as well. I will say, Jonathan Adams, he's only 3,800 on DraftKings. You don't need really the salary savers, but if there is someone that I'm willing to eat the chalk a little bit more, it is Jonathan Adams, particularly if Sean Poindexter is going to be sidelined as well. I mean, at that point, we're looking at Adams getting even more involved potentially, and that's a scary thought for someone of his caliber. With the Pittsburgh Maulers, mentioned Bailey Gaither. We're going to be pivoting to Delvin Hardaway. With the Stallions, you look at Marlon Williams last week, wide receiver 3 overall, and Asirus Mitchell, wide receiver 6. But Victor Bolden was still out there running 100% of the routes. And honestly, eye test wise, I thought Bolden and what he was able to do after the catch really stood out while watching that one. And then with the Stars, Maurice Alexander, the wide receiver 1 from last week, but now he's banged up. So we have Jordan Sewell, DeAndre Overton coming off 100% route rates, Chris Rowland potentially coming back. I'll have a lot of exposure to Christian Rowland if he's going to be active, and even Devin Gray if he's active. So Alexander and Bug Howard were the odd men out in week 1 with all 5 wide receivers healthy. So I'm fine going back, out of all these guys, I'm most fine going back to the well with Jonathan Adams because, again, he's benefiting from newfound injuries in that offense, and he's just so damn good. I think he can make up for it. But in this Stars lineup, man, if all these guys are healthy, we could legitimately see last week's overall wide receiver 1 be the number 5 wide receiver in this offense. So Jordan Sewell, DeAndre Overton, Christian Rowland, definitely my top 3 plays from the past happy Stars. Mentioned Jonathan Adams as one, just having an absurdly cheap price. Again, you can save so much money on DraftKings if needed that there's just not really too much of a reason to worry about, who you need to jam in there. So have 8 players that are priced at $4,000 or under, yet had a route participation rate of at least 75% last week. Maulers tight end Hunter Thedford, 81% routes in week 2, just $2,500 on DraftKings. Gamblers wide receiver Tyler Palko is at 78% route rate. He only cost $3,000. John Franklin, particularly with some of those other moves we mentioned with them actually getting rid of lastly. I mean, John Franklin, 89% route rate and just $3,200. If you are looking for a pivot off Adams, in this low cost range, he's certainly viable. Panthers wide receiver Devin Ross, 100% route rate, $3,500. Panthers are getting a little bit healthier at wide receiver though, so I'd be a little worried about him. I think the best pivot off Jonathan Adams, I know I mentioned this with Franklin a second ago, so sorry for speaking out both sides of my mouth, but off Jonathan Adams, I love going to Maulers wide receiver Delvin Hardaway. Again, basically the same freaking opportunity profile as the number 2 fantasy wide receiver in the game in Gaither, but Hardaway's there for just $3,600, has similar numbers. Also want to point out Gamblers wide receiver Tyler Simmons, 100% route rate, just $3,900. Same 100% route rate for DeAndre Overton at just $3,400 for the Stars as well. So going to be a fun slate. I wish DraftKings was giving us a little bit bigger contest sizes, but you know what? We still have that chance to go win 25 large with the first place finish in their 100K tournament. So good luck to everyone out there. I'll be in the streets, and yeah, I'm going to be behind this computer for the majority of the weekend. So if you guys are, taking a break from the NFL draft, send some USFL lineups. Feel free to DM me, at me on Twitter, at iHartitz, and I'm happy to talk any sort of ball with you all. Week 3, best bets. We're 4-4 on the season, everyone. If you stop hearing my against the spread record, there's a good chance it went south. But right now, we'll take 500. Hopefully, be improving on that moving forward. But starting things off on Saturday, 2 Saturday games this week, 2 Sunday games. Houston Gamblers versus Tampa Bay Bandits. Bandits are 1-point favorites. Game total is at 38.5. I will be taking the Bandits -1 here. I feel like this line could be a point or 2 higher. Ultimately, I think Jordan Tiamou has a higher ceiling than Clayton Thorson. We can talk about who's actually played maybe a little bit better to start, but I still think it's not a close quarterback question if we had a larger sample size. So give me Tiamou and the Bandits, just 1-point favorites over the Bandits. Tough to throw out, the 31, whatever it was, point loss from last week and completely ignore that. I do think this line, if this was a week 2 matchup, I think this line would be 3 or 4 points higher. Game of the week. Undefeated Birmingham Stallions versus the undefeated New Orleans Breakers. Breakers are 3.5-point favorites. Game total is at 44.5. If Kyle Sloter was 100% healthy, I'd be fine to roll with him. But as we've talked about 5 times on this podcast, he's not. Give me the Stallions plus 3.5 in hopes that pass rush causes all sorts of problems for Sloter. And they keep on putting up points. So the Stallions, first in points scored, dead last in points against. We need that defense to, do a little bit better job of keeping their opponents out of the end zone. But again, just having that potential trump card with the pass rush could at least make things a bit more difficult for New Orleans than they've been in the first 2 weeks. Pittsburgh Maulers versus the Michigan Panthers. Somebody's O has got to go in this one. Panthers 2.5-point favorites. Game total 39.5. The Panthers and Jeff Fisher should not be favored against anyone. You can put a high school team out there and they should not be favored at this point. Give me the Maulers at plus 2.5 out of principle alone. Look, Jordan Love has played better than any quarterback on the Michigan Panthers. I think both offenses are probably too old school, but the Maulers have I think shown more schematically than the Panthers have all year. At this point, I don't think there's a big enough difference in the defenses to make that big of a leap. So get this, guys. The Panthers have 18 points in 2 weeks, and they've thrown for a total. They've had an entire game's worth of first half. So like they played 60 first half minutes. They've thrown for 49 yards in the first half in 2 weeks. Like it has been miserable in this passing game. I don't expect them to get much better. And finally, New Jersey Generals versus the Philadelphia Stars. Stars 1-point favorites, and I think they take this one. Give me the Stars -1 over the New Jersey Generals. Most run-heavy offense versus the most pass-heavy offense. What's better than this? Could be one of those situations where, hey, we just have, styles makes fights type of situation. Maybe this is a blowout one way or another. Ultimately, do just want to bet on the team. I think it's a little bit smarter, a little more pass happy in the Stars. With that said, if Brian Scott is going to be out of this game or even questionable, that's when we can switch back to the Generals, get behind DeAndre Johnson and Luis Perez. So that's going to wrap up this edition of PFF Fantasy Football Podcast, USFL edition. Appreciate you guys following along with this league. It's been fun. I mean, things were looking bad after a predictably rough week 1 on Easter, and then we had that horrendous Friday night game, with the Michigan Panthers, letting everyone down. Last 3 games of week 2 were truly awesome, though. So I'm really hoping that scoring was a sign of more good things to come, and we get some good football going on. Everyone, live football is happening this week. I'm excited about the draft too, but God, it's 2022. It's legal to have multiple TVs in one room. Get USFL on the side TV. Why the hell not? So thanks so much for tuning in, people. We will be back here on Monday reviewing what happened, and then back here again next Thursday previewing week 4. So I'm Ian Hartitz. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, take care, everybody.